Now we're going for the next talk in our stage number 3 from API Days. I want to welcome the next speaker. We're going to talk about API DevOps, API Ops, and I welcome Puja. Sorry, I don't know if I'm saying your name correctly.
Yeah, it's Puja.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much for joining us, and I leave the stage to you, and I hope that everyone enjoys. Ask the questions in the chat, and we'll review it at the end of the talk. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Lorena. Hello, everyone. My name is Pooja Mistry, and I'm really excited to be sharing this session with you, which is all about what you can build in an API-first world with APIOps. So with that said, I wanted to introduce myself. I am a developer advocate for Postman, which is a API platform that's used worldwide. And for many people, Postman is a tool that helps people work with APIs more efficiently. So we're with this conference being API Days interface, I feel like this session will be very useful for those of you who've worked with APIs or who have interacted with Postman. And I'd love to take this moment to share with you all of the various tools, things that you can do with Postman. So you might be wondering why you are here at this point in time and joining this conference and joining this session. Well, this conference proves that APIs are running the world, and they are the global growth of the API ecosystem has been strong. And we have some statistics, which is from our 2022 State of the API report. And we also have one that we've released this year as well. But last year, we found out that there are over 234 countries that are creating over 38 billion collections worldwide. And there's billions of requests being sent each and every day. So with that, we can see that the ecosystem is global. And so with that, what I'd like to think is that APIs are powering everything around us, and behind our desktops and mobile apps, everything is connected through APIs, such as appliances, cars, the internet. And so when we use these as objects, we tend to focus on the interface that controls them. But beneath the surface of a lot of these objects, you see that APIs are doing the heavy lifting. And so with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about two different personas of API creators. So the personas that I like to think about are the producer versus the consumer. And these two can be broken up into an API lifecycle. And so when they work together, I like to think about them collaborating in a way where they are able to be defined as well as discovered by both sets of personas. So in a well-defined API lifecycle, takes advantage of a full API platform. And this allows people to govern the distribution and development of APIs throughout many different teams. So this lifecycle might mean something different depending on who you're talking to. So for example, if you are a producer, which means you're a creator of APIs, you'll probably stand in the side of developing and testing and securing your APIs. Whereas if you're a consumer, you probably are working to discover, evaluate, integrate, and test these APIs. So Postman is a tool that basically takes these two personas into mind when it comes to how people work with APIs. And so keep this lifecycle in the back of your mind, because today we're going to be touching on different aspects of this lifecycle, and we're going to show how APIs are built and tested and deployed. So before I go into those things, I like to kind of think about an analogy that I often share with during my talks. So I like to think about an analogy of breaking down a recipe. So when I thought about building this talk, I figured the best analogy that is reflected worldwide with users throughout the world is an analogy of a recipe or some food. So it was kind of a no-brainer when I went down this path. So if we break down this recipe, I like to think of this as two basic components that create something completely unique. So here we have the ingredients plus directions, and we can create a unique consumable product. So if we take this analogy of a recipe and take it and describe it towards APIs, we can kind of take a look at our ingredients, which are our APIs, plus some directions that we give that API, whether that's connecting APIs in unique ways or building integration pipelines. We can eventually come up with a completely unique and consumable product. So let's take a deeper look at just the ingredients of these recipes. So with that, you might be taking a look at some of these ingredients, which are APIs, and maybe if there are any Food Network Chopped fans out there, I hope that this image or this slide sparks some creativity when you take a first look at your mystery basket. So you have some APIs here and you can connect them, but what are the unique products that we can create? So some of them are well known, and with these unique combinations, what kind of products can you make? So I'd like to take this moment for you to take a thought about what you can create with some of these ingredients or these APIs. So let's go into that. So before we go into what you can create, let's take a look at the tools that we have available. So so with the tools you have available, the tool we're going to be talking about specifically today is Postman. And Postman is an API platform that's used for building APIs, and it simplifies each step of the API lifecycle, and it streamlines collaboration. So you can create and also test APIs in a faster, more reliable way. So the heart of Postman is, we'll dive into what the heart of Postman is, but Postman is so much more than just being able to send API requests. So most of you might have used Postman as a tool to send your HTTP requests. However, it's grown over the last few years as a complete end-to-end API platform. So it's also a place for you to document your request. You can create workspaces, work with environments, and collaborate with your team members. And the interesting thing about Postman is that it also includes mock servers to mock API endpoints, and you can monitor and automate your entire API processes in an interesting way. Some of you might have only used Postman to work with HTTP requests, but we have a variety of requests that I'll be sharing as well. So the heart of the Postman product is working with workspaces. So workspaces are a collaborative place that helps teams solve problems. And just like a work environment has different tools to help with particular tasks, Postman's workspace has tools to help with tasks related to APIs. So if any skilled professional might have a workbench, and so in the case of working with APIs, we have workspaces. So within workspaces, you can work for developers. Postman provides a personal workspace for free, and these workspaces now allow any developer, whether they're a quality engineer or a product manager, to organize their APIs and do the things that they want to do. Or you can work in a team workspace, partner workspace, or a public workspace, which you can share all of your work to people anywhere. So a collaborative workspace allows any person you give access to the ability to organize and view and work with your collections. So speaking of collections, let's dive a little bit into what they are and how they are used. So collection is an open source JSON format that lets us organize API requests and work, and it's used to work to represent across the entire API lifecycle. So essentially, collections provide a machine and human readable representation of your API, which is portable, shareable, and executable. So in that case, collections can truly be a place where your work is organized, and it can be a place where you share all of the requests that you have as well. So with interesting thing about collections as well is that they're very interoperable. So you can convert a collection to a open API definition or vice versa. And then in the Postman API builder, that's where you can design your API and use your API definition to convert that into a collection to test your API endpoints. So there's a lot of interesting ways to work with collections, and I can give you a little bit of a look at what that looks like. So also, when it comes to working with APIs, we have inside the collections, you're working with API requests. So we have HTTP requests that are most often used, but we now have GraphQL requests, gRPC requests, WebSocket requests, Socket.io requests. So you can work with multiple types of requests within your collection, whether they're synchronous or asynchronous, and you can work to test those type of requests accordingly. So there's a lot you can do with Postman that's more than limited to than just your HTTP requests. And then finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about variables, which allows you to store and reuse your values. And by being able to store and reuse your values, you can reference them throughout your collections to build dynamic workflows and in your test scripts. So they help you work efficiently and collaborate with your teammates. So here you can work with collections, variables at the collection level, at the global level, which allows you to use throughout your entire workspace, collection level, which limits you to your collection, environment level, where you can share environments across various different workspaces, as well as your local level. So there are a lot of ways to work with variables, and they allow you to create dynamic end-to-end workflows, which ultimately give your scripts much more tenacity and ability to build entire conditional situations. So for example, with Postman, it has a powerful runtime, which is based on Node.js. And essentially this allows you to create some sort of dynamic behavior to your collections. So you can write API tests, build requests that contain parameters, pass data between requests, and do a lot more. So essentially you can write any JavaScript code, as well as work with any libraries that you might be interested in to get some sort of dynamic behavior to your requests. So on the producer side, I talked a little bit about the API builder when I was talking about collections. So on the producer side, you can use Postman's API builder to build your APIs, to write your definitions, to design them, and then you can also use your API builder to create collections, which allows you to test your APIs. So let's take a look at what recipe we're building today. So with the recipe that we're building in today's session, I'm using a couple of different APIs here. I'm using a Twitter API, I'm using a Position Stack API, an Open Weather API, and eventually I'm creating a unique consumable product where I'm using scripts to eventually manipulate and get some data between those APIs and then create something completely unique. So let's take a look at what that looks like today. So I have an example of what that looks like. And so it's part of my published Postman templates. So I'm happy to share that in the chat as well. So just a second. So I wanted to share this particular, let me just see if I can just this particular collection with you all. So the published Postman templates is a workspace that we have available for all of our Postman users. And it's a completely public workspace. And there's a ton of different collections in here that uses a lot of different types of APIs. So this is a great place to get started, especially if you want an example of how to work with multiple APIs. And I think I can post that in the chat, and perhaps the moderators can share that with you all. But my particular recipe that we're working with today is part of this workspace. And here I have this workspace here, which is a workspace that I've created, which allows you to visualize your teammates across the globe. And so if you're interested in working with this workspace, you can always create a fork, and this allows you to then work with that in your own environment. So let's take a deeper look at this workspace. So I wanted to share this workspace by first sharing a blog with you all of what the idea I had here and how I went to go about creating this product. So I had this image in mind, and if you're not familiar with Postman, you can do a lot of interesting visualizations as well. So I wanted to basically create a workflow which allows you to basically take some data and put that as a collection variable, such as in your request body. So you can create some sort of data and put that as your variables, and then you can then use the visualizer to map your users. So I've used a couple of different workflows in this particular example. So the first workflow I've used is being able to chain individual requests. So in this workflow, I was able to go and find each of my Twitter users and get all of their locations I get all of their location names, and then use another API to get their longitude, latitude, as well as another API to then get the weather in their location. So I use these two functions, pm.environment.set as well as pm.environment.get, to basically set and get variables within Postman and work dynamically. So if you're interested in taking a look at what that looks like, you have all of these requests, and you can then set all of those request details in your own objects. And then eventually, once each of those APIs are run, you can then use that to visualize your data. So that's one way to do it. So I thought, okay, I can use multiple individual requests to do that. However, I can also use Postman to send asynchronous requests. So when sending asynchronous requests, I'm using Postman to basically send multiple requests that can run in the background while I'm sending another request. So for example, there's a method called pm.sendRequest. This is allows you to execute multiple different requests. So here I have an example where I am sending my position API as well as my weather API in a single request, where I'm sending my Twitter data as well. So this shows that in this example, everything I can do in these 15 requests, I can do using 3 Postman requests. I can do that using 2 Postman requests, and I can also do that all using 1 Postman request. So ultimately, your 20 requests can be sent asynchronously using 1 or 2 requests. So feel free to take a look at the logic when you fork that repo. But essentially, what's happening here is that I'm using pm.sendRequest to send API requests asynchronously and get their data accordingly. And then the final way that I wanted to show how you can work with workflows is by looping over a request. So here I'm using the function postman.setNextRequest, which basically enables you to specify which Postman request runs next following the current request. So it lets you set up the logic of setting up which requests you want to run first, which one you want to run second, which one you want to run third. And then you can build a completely custom workflow, especially using the collection runner to build a conditional request where you can loop over multiple requests until you get your final outcome. So in this case, I have an example where I only get the weather data once I've gotten all of the longitude and latitudes for my colleagues, and then I can finally visualize. So essentially, there are 3 different ways to create workflows using set next request, which allows you to set the direction of when you want to run what. Send pm.send request, which allows you to send multiple API requests. And then finally, being able to chain your requests using pm.environment set and pm.environment get, which lets you send data from one request to another. So I hope this gives a little bit of interesting insight into how workflows are created within Postman. I will go ahead and share this blog as well if that's something that you all are interested in as well. So now that we have a little bit of an understanding of what that looks like, let's go back to our slides and share how we put it all together. So essentially being able to put it all together, sending one API request, then getting that response, using scripts to send that data into another request. Essentially, you're working with multiple APIs to create a fully fleshed out application, which is a completely unique and uniquely created product. And we've seen that our Postman users are now also creating collections with these fully fleshed out conditional workflows as the entire product for their customers. So that's one way to kind of put it all together when it comes to doing that. However, if you're interested in scaling this recipe beyond just that one collection or one workflow, you can take a look at APIOps, which I like to think about APIOps is the ability to reuse and scale your entire workflows. So when it comes to working with APIOps, creating recipes at scales, you're interacting with multiple APIs, you're mixing and matching APIs across different services, you're chaining your API calls. So if you want to trigger your API calls, you can chain these API calls to share data across requests. You're triggering conditional workflows. So basically you're changing execution order, and then eventually you're making this end result much more consumable to your users as well. So this could be a compilation of reports, or this could be a Slack channel, or this could be an Airtable, or something that you're getting a fully scaled out end-to-end product there. So with that, I wanted to share the idea of APIOps. So basically the idea of APIOps applies the concepts of GitOps and DevOps to API deployment. So by using practices from these 2 methodology, APIOps enables anyone involved in the API lifecycle for API design, development, and deployment to ensure the quality of your API is introduced with the specifications you're building. So essentially, I like to think about APIOps as the combination of DevOps and GitOps, and it leverages the ability to build your definition using maybe an open API spec, test it using collections, and then eventually create some sort of chained workflows to build out executable and consumable requests. So APIOps, we say that it's for anyone working with APIs, but especially when you're working on a team, it's developers and DevOps and testers that are working together to submit a fully a scalable product. So the heart of API ops I like to think about is automation. So with automation, Postman is kind of built in a very interesting way where there's a lot of automation involved when it comes to working with multiple APIs. So let's take a look at some of the ways that you can automate your collections. So the first way to automate your collections is using the collection runner. So by using the collection runner, you can send all of your API requests manually within the Postman platform. So if you're interested in working with a collection runner, basically you can click on the run tab and you can see how to run these tests, whether you want to run them manually. And then you can also run these tests using the Postman CLI. So if you're interested in working with Postman CLI, you can add in your API keys, and you can run the Postman CLI on various CI/CD configurations, such as Jenkins, Bitbucket, Circle CI, GitLab, Azure Pipelines, Travis CI. So there's a lot of inbuilt connection when it comes to working with CI/CD pipelines. The other way to work with automation is working with scheduled runs. So you basically, with scheduled runs, what you can do is you can schedule your runs to you can schedule your run frequency, whether that's weekly or hourly, and you can set your environments that you might be interested in, how many iterations. And then essentially what you're getting is a full end-to-end view of when your APIs were successful, when they were not successful, and you can get updates on the overall monitoring of your APIs. And then we now also introduce Postman flows. So Postman flows allows you to visually represent your APIs in an interesting way. So you can create full flows, which basically lets you send requests, get data from one request to another, build dashboards, and then visually represent your APIs in that way. And so here I have an example where I'm showing you can use the top 10 stop requests, and then you can use a for loop on that to basically get some data and visualize some sort of which stock prices are hitting at what level. So which ones are higher, which ones are lower. You can build end-to-end dashboards. So flows is a visual representation when it comes to automation. And then finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of our newest ways to do some automation testing is our performance testing feature that recently got GA'd this past June, which allows you to manage the performance of your APIs. And performance testing is available in the desktop client of Postman. And so if you click on performance tab right here, you can set up your users, whether you have like 20 virtual users. You can set this load pretty high, and you can set your test duration, and you can preview the load that your API is performing under. So that's one of our newest features. So with that, I'd like to go back to that question that I might have asked earlier, is that what are you going to build now that you have an understanding of all the features that Postman has to offer? What is it that you are going to work with? And so with that, let's take a look back at the APIs that I shared with you all when we first started this session. Now maybe that you have an understanding of how to work with APIs, how to chain requests, how to create completely interesting and consumable products. If I give you this slide again, what are you going to build with this? And so I hope this takes you, gives you a little bit more time to think and understand what your possibilities are. However, if you'd like to have some inspiration, you can always explore the world of APIs within Postman. So you can go to the Explore network and explore all of the public APIs that we have available on our platform. And you can take a look at everything that we have available, and you can go ahead and fork those into your own workspace and get started with.
Thank you.
Better understanding with development. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Puja. It was very interesting call.